Beneath the cobblestone streets of medieval markets, where merchants haggled over spices and silks, a hidden world thrived in silence, while crowds bustled above. A labyrinth of aqueducts stretched beneath their feet, not just carrying water, but secrets. These underground channels were the unseen arteries of power, whispering political deals between rival factions, noble families, and even kings. Picture this: a messenger slipping through a concealed passage, a coded message tucked into his sleeve, while above, the market's chaos masked his mission. This wasn't just engineering, it was espionage, diplomacy, and control, all flowing through the veins of stone and mortar. What if the most important conversations of the medieval world didn't happen in grand halls or council chambers, but in the damp, shadowy tunnels beneath public squares? These aqueducts were more than feats of architecture, they were instruments of influence. Imagine a lord summoning an ally through a hidden entrance, their voices echoing off wet walls as they plotted to sway a kingdom's fate. The market's noise drowned out their whispers, and the very infrastructure meant to serve the people became a tool for the elite. This is where history's invisible hand moved, unseen but undeniable. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this clandestine system. How were these aqueducts designed to hide more than water? Who controlled them? And what deals were struck in their depths? From engineering marvels to political chess moves, we'll trace how these hidden networks shaped empires. By the end, you'll never look at a medieval marketplace the same way again. Because beneath the surface of history's most vibrant hubs lay a world of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Medieval marketplaces didn't just spring up by accident. They were carefully positioned at the crossroads of trade, power, and secrecy. Think of them as the beating hearts of cities where goods, gossip, and government collided. But what made these markets ideal for covert dealings wasn't just the crowds or the chaos. It was their foundation. Many were built over Roman ruins or repurposed ancient waterways, their original blueprints forgotten by all but the most cunning minds. Take the Grand Bazaar of Constantinople, where silk traders and spice merchants filled the air with exotic scents. Beneath their stalls, centuries-old aqueducts still carried water and whispers. A nobleman could slip into a side alley, descend a hidden stair, and vanish into a tunnel that led straight to the palace. The market's noise masked every footstep, every hushed conversation. Even the guards patrolling above had no idea what transpired below. Water was the perfect alibi. Everyone expected aqueducts to serve public fountains or baths, so no one questioned their construction or their extra passages. Engineers loyal to the crown designed these systems with deliberate twists and turns, creating dead ends for the uninitiated and secret routes for those in the know. A merchant might deliver a crate of figs to a stall, only for it to be lowered through a trapdoor into a waiting diplomat's hands. The market's ordinary rhythms became the ultimate disguise. And it wasn't just about moving messages. Control the aqueducts, and you controlled the city's lifeline: water for drinking, for sanitation, even for putting out fires. A rival faction could cripple an enemy by diverting a channel or poisoning a well, all while the blame fell on poor maintenance or bad luck. The real power players understood the marketplace wasn't just where deals were made. It was where empires were quietly reshaped, one hidden tunnel at a time. By the time the common folk noticed anything amiss, the deed was done, a treaty signed, an alliance forged, a rival eliminated. The aqueduct's greatest trick wasn't their engineering, but their invisibility. They turned the mundane into the monumental, proving that sometimes history's most pivotal moments didn't happen in the light. They flowed in the dark, The true genius of these hidden aqueducts lay not just in what they carried, but how they were built to disappear in plain sight. While cathedral spires and castle walls showcased medieval grandeur, the most ingenious work happened underground, where visibility meant vulnerability. Master builders employed clever tricks to mask their handiwork, constructing false walls that matched surrounding stonework and disguising access points as ordinary wells or storage cellars. Some tunnels even featured acoustic dampening, rounded ceilings, and uneven surfaces that swallowed echoes, ensuring conspiratorial whispers never traveled farther than intended. Consider the case of Milan's Navigli district, where 14th-century engineers integrated aqueducts into the existing canal system. On the surface, water wheels turned peacefully, powering mills for grinding grain, but beneath them, narrow service tunnels branched off into a shadow network. Local stonemasons left subtle markers in the brickwork, visible only to those who knew where to look: a chiseled arrow hidden in decorative patterns, or a seemingly random groove that actually pointed to a pressure-activated door. These weren't just construction quirks, they were a secret language allowing allies to navigate the labyrinth while keeping rivals in the dark. The secrecy extended to the builders themselves. Guild records from Bruges reveal how aqueduct engineers took binding oaths, pledging silence under penalty of exile or worse. Some were reportedly housed in isolated workshops during construction, their families compensated handsomely for their absence, a medieval version of non-disclosure agreements. The few surviving sketches show meticulous attention to misdirection, with blueprints including fake chambers and decoy tunnels to confuse any unauthorized explorers. What's most striking is how these designs balanced utility with deception. A single aqueduct might serve triple duty, delivering clean water to public fountains, diverting sewage away from noble quarters, and providing discreet passage for a spy carrying sealed letters. The slope of each channel was calculated not just for water flow, but to create dry walkways alongside the streams, hidden highways where a courier could sprint beneath a dozen city blocks without ever being seen. This wasn't mere paranoia. In an era when shifting alliances could topple dynasties, controlling information meant controlling power. A well-placed tunnel might allow a duke to smuggle troops inside city walls during a siege, or let a bishop escape a mob undetected. The aqueducts became chessboards where every move was invisible until suddenly, checkmate arrived from below. Water wasn't just a resource in the medieval world, it was a weapon. Those who controlled the hidden aqueducts held life itself in their hands, turning valves and gates into instruments of raw political power. Imagine a merchant guild that refused to pay higher taxes suddenly finding their district's fountains running dry, while a loyal noble's gardens overflowed just streets away. No public decrees, no soldiers in the streets, just the quiet agony of thirst and the unspoken message that compliance meant survival. The real mastery lay in the subtlety. A ruler could appear generous by solving water shortages they'd secretly engineered, or broker favors by restoring flow to a rival's lands at the perfect moment. In Siena, records show how the ruling council used the Bettini aqueduct system to punish rebellious neighborhoods during droughts, while ensuring their own wine cellars stayed cool and stocked. The people saw misfortune, the powerful saw strategy, but the aqueduct's true brilliance emerged after dark, when these watery corridors became the ultimate meeting rooms. Unlike castles or council halls watched by spies and scribes, a tunnel beneath a market had no prying eyes. Venetian doges reportedly used subterranean canals to negotiate with foreign envoys, their gondolas gliding past storehouses where not even the rats could overhear. The constant rush of water masked voices, while the labyrinthine layout ensured any unwanted follower would be hopelessly lost within minutes. Some tunnels even had built-in safeguards. In Cordoba, archaeologists found chambers with underwater entrances accessible only at low tide, with discussion timed to the moon's pull. Miss your window, and the rising water sealed secrets away until the next conspiratorial cycle. Other systems featured whisper galleries, where curved walls carried voices only to specific listening posts, turning physics into a tool of discretion. This was power stripped bare, no banners, no thrones, just the quiet understanding that whoever decided where the water flowed, decided everything else too. And as long as the public believed their wells were subject to nature's whims rather than human calculation, the illusion held. The greatest trick wasn't hiding the aqueducts, it was making their influence seem invisible. The damp corridors beneath medieval cities weren't just engineering marvels, they were the ultimate safe houses for political intrigue. While sunlight illuminated the market's bustle above, shadowy figures moved through these submerged passageways, their agendas hidden beneath layers of stone and silence. A nobleman could vanish from his own banquet, descend a spiral staircase concealed behind a tapestry, and emerge moments later in a tunnel that connected rival territories. The aqueducts didn't just transport water, they ferreted secrets between factions that would never dare meet in public. Take the case of 14th century Florence, where the Medici family allegedly used underground channels to broker deals with exiled rivals. A chronicler's account describes a midnight meeting beneath the Palazzo Vecchio, where torchlight flickered against wet brick as two enemies shook hands over a shared enemy. The terms they agreed to that night would later surface as sudden tax reforms with no paper trail, no witnesses, just the echoing drip of water sealing their pact. What made these tunnels so effective wasn't just their secrecy, but their unpredictability. Unlike castle corridors patrolled by guards, aqueducts twisted and branched without logic, their layouts known only to a select few. In Nuremberg, spies reportedly carried small iron keys that unlocked seemingly random grates, each leading to a different faction's private network. One wrong turn, and an intruder might find themselves ankle-deep in runoff, their presence betrayed by splashing footsteps. Even the acoustics conspired to protect the powerful. The low, steady rush of water created a natural sound curtain, while curved vaults distorted voices just enough to foil eavesdroppers. In Toledo, diplomats perfected the art of water whispers, leaning close to cascading channels where the noise drowned out their words beyond arm's length. It was privacy engineered into the very stones, turning infrastructure into an instrument of deception. The most brilliant ploys often exploited the tunnel's dual purpose. A messenger might pose as a laborer repairing a leak, his tools hiding coded letters. Wine barrels rolled through certain passages could contain anything from gold to a kidnapped rival. And when a sudden flood forced the evacuation of a city square, that was often the signal for conspirators to move unseen. These hidden networks reshaped history's chessboard, proving that real power didn't always flow from the throne. Sometimes it bubbled up from the darkness below. Merchants were the invisible puppeteers of medieval intrigue, their hands clean even as they pulled strings in the murkiest deals. While nobles and clergy might have held official power, it was the traders who truly understood the underground networks, not just of goods, but of influence. These were men who could walk unnoticed between worlds, their carts and cargo masking movements that would have raised alarms for anyone else. A spice merchant from Damascus might deliver saffron to a duke's kitchen one day, then vanish down a cellar stair the next, emerging in a rival stronghold with terms for a truce tucked between rolls of silk. Their value lay in their neutrality. Unlike knights or diplomats bound by oaths, merchants operated in a gray zone trusted by all precisely because they belonged to none. Records from Genoa reveal how certain trading families maintained private maps of aqueduct passages, updating them with each new construction project. These weren't just navigation tools, they were bargaining chips. A merchant might lease access to a particular tunnel for an exorbitant fee, then conveniently forget who'd paid when authorities came asking. The smarter ones diversified their portfolios. Take Jacopo of Pisa, whose ledgers showed profits from wool exports, but whose real wealth came from special deliveries. His ships carried Venetian glass to Alexandria, yes, but their hulls also hid papal missives bound for Cairo. He even employed a team of orphan boys as water runners, small enough to slip through maintenance shafts and deliver messages without leaving footprints in the muck. This system thrived on plausible deniability. If caught, a merchant could always claim ignorance that the coded letter in his saddlebag was a simple inventory list, or that the midnight meeting in the cistern was just a discussion of grain prices. After all, commerce required discretion. Who could prove otherwise? The aqueduct's greatest gift to these middlemen wasn't just secrecy, but the ability to wear innocence like a cloak. Yet some merchants played a far darker game. In Barcelona, the Vives family allegedly controlled an entire underground postal network, complete with way stations where couriers could swap disguises. Their price for passage, sometimes coin, sometimes favors like turning a blind eye when certain packages were lowered into their warehouses. The line between smuggler and statesman blurred until it vanished entirely. What's fascinating is how these arrangements mirrored the water systems themselves. Just as aqueducts branched and interconnected beneath cities, so too did the merchants' alliances, fluid, adaptable, and impossible to dam completely. A deal brokered in London's tunnels might ripple outward to affect treaties in Paris or Venice, all because one sharp-eyed trader recognized opportunity in the damp and the dark. The true currency of these hidden corridors wasn't gold or silver, but information, and no one traded it more skillfully than those who moved unseen. Florence's Mercato Vecchio wasn't just a marketplace, it was a battlefield where power flowed underground. In the mid-1400s, beneath the shouts of fishmongers and the clatter of coin, a hidden aqueduct became the lifeline for a conspiracy that would shake the city's foundations. The ruling Albizzi family had controlled Florence for decades, but their enemies were tunneling literally beneath their feet. Records from the Strozzi family archives describe a peculiar phrase, the wet path. At first glance, it might refer to a flooded street after spring rains, but to those in the know, it was the code name for a clandestine network of channels beneath the market. Workers repairing a collapsed sewer in the 1950s stumbled upon its true purpose: narrow walkways branching like veins from the main aqueduct, each leading to strategic locations. The back door of a wool guild hall, the cellar of a disgraced banker's palazzo, even the foundations of the Palazzo della Signoria itself. The system's brilliance lay in its simplicity. A baker might receive an order for 20 extra loaves, a signal that couriers would be moving through the tunnels that night. The bread itself served as camouflage. Hollowed-out rolls carried scraps of vellum with ciphered messages. One surviving note, now in the Florentine State Archives, bears water stains and the faint imprint of a wax seal. Translated, it reads, "When the fountain runs red, the lion sleeps." Historians believe this referenced a planned diversion, dyeing the water of the public fountain near the Albizzi Palace as a distraction while conspirators gathered below. What made this network so devastating was its invisibility. While the Albizzi posted guards on bridges and city gates, their opponents waded through waist-deep channels, emerging through forgotten grates to whisper with allies. The final blow came on a night when official records claim the market square was cleansed by storm. In truth, the rain masked the movement of 200 armed men through the aqueducts, who surfaced simultaneously from a dozen hidden points to seize key strongholds. By dawn, the Albazi were fleeing the city, their rule washed away by the very waterways they'd neglected to monitor. This wasn't just a coup, it was a masterclass in turning public works against their creators. The conspirators understood something revolutionary. In a city where everyone watched the streets, real power flowed through the stones beneath them. And long after the last conspirator died, the wet path remained, waiting for the next hand bold enough to wield it. Water wasn't just a tool, it was a sacred language in medieval politics, its very flow imbued with meaning. When two warring factions met in the echoing darkness beneath a marketplace, the sound of running water wasn't just cover for whispers, it transformed their words into something unbreakable. Oaths sworn near hidden springs or underground channels carried the weight of divine witness, as if the purity of the water itself could cleanse deceit from human hearts. Consider the ritual practiced in 12th century Toledo, where rival lords would each drink from a shared cup filled at a secret aqueduct junction before sealing treaties. Chroniclers wrote that breaking such an oath meant the waters would turn against you, a curse made terrifyingly real when one notorious oath breaker later drowned in his own cellar during an unexplained flash flood. Whether coincidence or clever sabotage, the message was clear: water remembered. This symbolism ran deeper than superstition. Droughts weren't just natural disasters, they were political weapons framed as divine judgment. A cunning ruler might quietly divert aqueducts from a rebellious barony's lands, then proclaim their suffering as heaven's punishment for disloyalty. The people, parched and desperate, would turn on their own leaders, never suspecting the true source of their thirst. Even the architecture played into this watery theater. Some aqueduct meeting chambers featured carved reliefs of river gods watching from the walls, their stone eyes seeming to follow conspirators in the flickering torchlight. In Prague, diplomats reported feeling an uncanny pressure when negotiating in the vaulted tunnels beneath the old town square, as if the weight of all that flowing water above them compressed time itself, forcing decisions of historic consequence. The most powerful agreements often happened at dawn, when the first light would strike specially placed crystal prisms in certain tunnels, scattering rainbows across the negotiating table. To medieval minds, this wasn't just pretty optics, it was a sign of celestial approval, binding the deal with colors only angels could paint. Yet for all its sacred trappings, water's true power lay in its duality. The same channel that carried life-giving drink could drown a man, just as the purest spring could conceal poison. Those who mastered the hidden aqueducts understood this better than anyone. They didn't just control water's flow, but the very meaning it carried. And in a world where perception shaped reality, that made them architects of truth itself, spies didn't just walk through medieval cities, they flowed through them, vanishing into the veins of stone beneath busy marketplaces. These aqueduct tunnels weren't mere escape routes, they formed the era's most sophisticated intelligence network. Imagine a shadowy figure pressing his ear against a ventilation shaft disguised as a decorative fountain spout, capturing every incriminating word exchanged between two merchants plotting against the crown. The very channels meant to sustain life became tools for intercepting secrets that could end it. In Valencia, archaeologists uncovered narrow side chambers branching off main aqueduct lines, each precisely positioned beneath taverns where foreign traders gathered. The ceilings bore peculiar concave hollows that amplified sound from above like natural microphones. Records suggest these listening wells enabled spies to monitor mercantile gossip for hints of embargo violations or troop movements. One particularly clever design in Augsburg featured copper pipes running vertically from market stalls down to hidden scribes, who transcribed conversations verbatim onto wax tablets. The system was so effective that when a visiting ambassador once joked about poisoning the Duke's wine, his words appeared in the court records before his goblet was empty. But the real art lay in movement. Expert agents mastered the rhythm of water flow, timing their passages to when mill wheels upstream would mask their splashing footsteps. Some wore specially padded shoes that left no marks on the damp stone, while others trained carrier pigeons to navigate the tunnels, their messages protected in tiny wax-sealed tubes. The aqueduct's natural acoustics even dictated spycraft techniques. Whistling a particular sequence of notes could make sound bounce strangely off curved walls, alerting allies without arousing suspicion. Perhaps the most chilling innovation was the water trap, a feature found in several Italian city-states. By manipulating sluice gates, operatives could flood specific tunnel sections on command, drowning pursuers or erasing evidence. A Milanese spy captain's journal boasts of trapping an entire papal envoy squad this way, their bodies washing up days later in the public canals with no trace of how they'd entered the waterways. What made this system unbeatable was its invisibility. Unlike Castle Intrigue, where whispered plots might echo down stone corridors, aqueduct spies operated in a world where water swallowed secrets whole. A merchant might feel safe confessing treason over a barrel of salted herring, never suspecting his words were trickling down through cracks in the cobblestones straight into the ears of power. The lesson was clear. In the medieval world, even the walls didn't listen as carefully as the water. The great cathedrals of medieval Europe may have pointed heavenward with their soaring spires, but their true power often lay beneath the foundations. Many religious institutions were deliberately constructed over ancient aqueduct junctions, their hallowed halls serving as elegant cover for the political machinery humming below. A bishop could host a public mass praising peace in the morning, then descend into the crypt that evening to mediate between warring nobles, his sacred vestments hiding the damp hem of a robe that had brushed against tunnel walls. Monasteries proved particularly useful for this holy subterfuge. Their sprawling wine cellars and scriptoriums frequently concealed access points to aqueduct networks, with monks serving as unlikely gatekeepers of these secret passages. In Canterbury, records show how the priory's water cellar, ostensibly for storing baptismal supplies, actually housed a spiral stair leading to a tunnel that ran straight to the royal castle. The same brothers who copied scriptures by daylight might guide messengers by torchlight, their vows of silence ensuring discretion. The clergy's involvement wasn't just opportunistic, it was institutional. Church law granted sanctuary, meaning a noble could take refuge in a cathedral while secretly negotiating terms through the underground channels beneath its nave. In one notorious case from Burgundy, a count accused of treason spent weeks praying in a chapel while his allies used the adjacent aqueduct to smuggle in documents that eventually cleared his name. The altar's proximity to hidden waterways wasn't coincidental, it was strategic. Religious symbolism lent these dealings an air of divine approval. Treaties signed in subterranean chapels were often sealed with water from sacred springs rather than wax, implying heavenly witness to the agreement. A 14th-century fresco in Siena's Palazzo Pubblico even depicts Saint Ansanus blessing a group of men clustered around a flowing channel, a thinly veiled nod to the city's aqueduct diplomacy. Yet the holiest deception involved the church's greatest commodity, time. Monastic water clocks could be deliberately miscalibrated during sensitive negotiations, making meetings appear to occur before or after curfews. A cardinal might publicly denounce usury on Sunday, then use the abbey's hidden conduits to transport bullion under cover of Vespers bells. The rhythm of prayer and ritual became the perfect metronome for clandestine affairs. This sacred subterfuge reached its peak during the Avignon papacy, when rival factions used the aqueducts beneath the papal palace like a celestial switchboard. A tunnel leading to the kitchens might deliver not just food, but intelligence from Naples. A drainage channel supposedly carrying wastewater could actually ferry encrypted letters to Marseille. The very architecture of faith had been repurposed not to undermine religion, but to serve its earthly stewards. After all, in a world where God moved in mysterious ways, who could question why a bishop's robes were sometimes damp at the hem? Walking through one of these aqueduct tunnels unprepared wasn't just risky, it could be deadly. Medieval engineers didn't just build passages, they crafted puzzles in stone with twists meant to confound anyone who stumbled in uninvited. Take the infamous drowning gallery beneath Bologna as Market Square, where unsuspecting intruders would follow what seemed like a main channel, only to find themselves trapped in a sloping chamber when unseen sluice gates opened upstream. Within minutes, rising water would force them against a smooth, featureless wall with no handholds, a brutal lesson in the consequences of trespassing. These weren't simple barriers. Some false walls were masterpieces of deception, constructed with bricks that matched the surrounding masonry perfectly but hid counterweight mechanisms. A lord's trusted courier might press a specific stone to make a section pivot silently, while an enemy spy would waste precious minutes hammering on what appeared to be solid rock. In Ghent, archaeologists discovered a tunnel system where every third archway bore nearly invisible scratch marks, a cipher indicating which passages led to real destinations and which terminated in vertical shafts dropping straight into sewage channels. The paranoia reached its peak in Venice, where certain aqueduct intersections featured echo traps. These specially shaped chambers would amplify footsteps, making a single pursuer sound like an approaching army. Couriers trained to freeze at these spots could listen for distorted echoes, revealing whether they were truly alone. Meanwhile, the infamous Lion's Mouth conduit near the Doge's palace included a section where the floor tiles could be heated from below, forcing unwanted visitors to either retreat or dance painfully across the stones, their cries muffled by the rushing water. Perhaps the cruelest trick lay in the psychology of these designs. Many included subtle taunts, like a rope ladder dangling just out of reach above a pit, or a rusted gate with a lock that appeared pickable, only to trigger a hidden mechanism sealing all exits. In Regensburg, one tunnel featured a carved Latin inscription at a dead end: Qui huc pervenit sine aqua desedit. He who reaches this point leaves without water. A bleak joke for those who'd penetrated too far. What's remarkable is how these features mirrored the era's power structures. Just as political alliances shifted like water through a maze of channels, the aqueducts themselves became physical manifestations of distrust where every corner might conceal betrayal, and survival depended on knowing secrets within secrets. The stones didn't just keep people out, they taught a visceral lesson about the price of curiosity in a world where knowledge was the ultimate currency. The aqueduct's dark underbelly went far beyond political whispers. These stone veins pulsed with a thriving black market where information was the most valuable currency of all. While officials monitored the roads and gates, a parallel economy flourished in the damp shadows, its goods floating silently through channels meant for fresh water. Waterproof tubes crafted from animal bladders bobbed along currents, each containing scrolls so sensitive they could topple dynasties. In Toledo, archaeologists found one such container still wedged in a side channel, its beeswax seal intact after 7 centuries inside, a coded message about a king's illegitimate heir, written in iron gall ink that resisted the water's erosion. But it wasn't just documents that traveled these liquid highways. Ingenious smugglers devised false-bottomed barrels that floated openly as wine shipments, their hidden compartments packed with Venetian glass, stolen relics, or purses of unmarked coins. A tunnel beneath Bruges fish market concealed alcoves where merchants traded something far more dangerous than herring-forged papal bulls with authentic-seeming lead seals, created by renegade scribes who'd memorized every flourish of the Vatican's handwriting. The aqueduct's constant flow provided perfect cover. A merchant could claim any floating object was accidental debris, while the real exchange happened where no watchman could see. The system's genius lay in its simplicity. At designated dead drops, a conspirator might tie a weighted bag to an iron ring beneath the waterline, knowing their contact would retrieve it before dawn. In Nuremberg, certain drainage grates had notches cut into their frames, marks indicating where to leave payment for passed-along secrets. Even children played unwitting roles. Street urchins hired to clean fountains were sometimes paid extra to accidentally dislodge particular stones, revealing hollows stuffed with silk-wrapped bribes. What made this underground post office so effective was its deniability. A noble caught with a suspicious letter could claim it washed into his cellar during a storm. A banker whose vault held smuggled gems might blame a long-forgotten ancestor. The water erased fingerprints, blurred ink, and corroded evidence, while the sheer mundanity of aqueduct maintenance provided endless excuses for suspicious activity. Who would question a workman knee-deep in runoff, especially when his repairs conveniently aligned with a rival's sudden misfortune? The most audacious schemes exploited water's natural properties. In Milan, spies used dye packets that dissolved after precisely 20 minutes, turning clear water crimson as a signal to attack. Parisian conspirators floated hollowed-out loaves containing mercury switches. When the bread tipped at a certain tunnel bend, the mercury completed an electrical circuit. Yes, medieval engineers understood basic conduction to trigger distant lanterns. This wasn't just smuggling, it was hydrological hacking, turning public utilities into private switchboards. By the time authorities realized what flowed beneath their feet, the damage was done. A treaty sabotaged, an army misdirected, a fortune diverted. The aqueducts had birthed a paradox. The same channels that sustained life above ground became the perfect vectors for every underground vice. And like water itself, the secrets they carried always found the path of least resistance straight into the hands of those who knew how to listen to the darkness. History remembers the queens and noblewomen who ruled openly, but the real power brokers often moved in silence, through the dripping passageways beneath their own palaces. While men clashed in council chambers, noblewomen like Marguerite of Flanders mastered the art of aqueduct diplomacy, turning their supposed domestic invisibility into the perfect cover for political maneuvering. Picture this: a lady's maid delivering fresh linens to a bedchamber, her wicker basket lined with wax-sealed letters destined for a rebel baron's hands. The same corridors that carried laundry and gossip became clandestine postal routes, with women orchestrating alliances from behind embroidered tapestries. Some of the most ingenious systems relied on domestic routines. In Burgundy, noblewomen hosted elaborate bathing parties where servants discreetly passed notes between soapsuds, the steam masking whispered instructions. Others encoded messages in embroidery patterns. A seemingly innocent floral border might chart secret aqueduct access points, stitched by hands dismissed as merely decorative. The Countess of Provence once smuggled an entire treaty inside a hollowed-out loom spindle, its threads dyed with colors corresponding to tunnel markers. But the true stroke of genius lay in leveraging stereotypes. When male couriers attracted suspicion, noblewomen sent children or elderly servants, figures deemed harmless, to scurry through maintenance shafts with missives tucked into bread rolls or prayer books. In Milan, a duchess famously trained her lapdogs to carry tiny scrolls in their collars, their playful routes through palace gardens masking drops into aqueduct grates. The system was so effective that when a rival once intercepted a maid, all she carried was a harmless recipe for spiced wine, while the real message floated downstream inside a corked wine bladder. These women didn't just exploit the tunnels, they reimagined them. While men controlled the official maps, noblewomen kept mental ledgers of every forgotten stair and loose grating. A prayer book from 13th century Toulouse contains marginal sketches of aqueduct junctions disguised as illuminations of biblical rivers, their true purpose legible only to initiates. Other matriarchs composed lullabies with coded directions, ensuring their knowledge passed to the next generation in plain hearing yet hidden in song. The ultimate power lay in plausible deniability. A nobleman caught negotiating could face execution, but who would accuse a duchess of treason when her only witnesses were washerwomen and choir girls? This shadow network thrived until the Renaissance, when rising paranoia about witchcraft transformed domestic spaces into suspect zones. But for centuries, the aqueducts had whispered with the footsteps of women who shaped history, not with swords, but with needles, looms, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the best way to control the game was to make the world forget you were playing. Even the most carefully guarded secrets could unravel in these watery labyrinths, where a single misplaced word or bribed laborer might expose an empire's worth of schemes. Take the infamous Millenie Flood of 1389, when a disgruntled engineer deliberately collapsed a tunnel segment during delicate negotiations between Visconti and Habsburg agents. The resulting deluge didn't just drown 3 couriers, it carried their waterlogged satchels straight into the public canals, where fishermen unfurled damning letters like sails. Within days, the piazza buzzed with details of the clandestine treaty, forcing both factions to abandon plans years in the making. Betrayal often flowed both ways. In 14th century Cologne, a spymaster's mistress reportedly etched incriminating tunnel routes onto lead sheets, then slipped them into the aqueduct's current only for the pieces to snag on a mill wheel downstream. The miller, recognizing the scribbled names of local officials, traded the information to a rival guild. The resulting purge saw 6 prominent merchants, accidentally locked in a flooding cellar, their screams muffled by the very waterways they'd once exploited. Some leaks were deliberate acts of war. During the Aragonese siege of Naples in 1441, defenders discovered enemy sappers tunneling beneath their walls, not to breach them but to tap into the aqueduct network. The invaders had planned to poison the water supply, but a laundress noticed strange sediment in her wash basin and alerted authorities. In retaliation, Neapolitan engineers reversed the flow through a secondary channel, drowning the saboteurs in their own excavation. The lesson was brutal but clear. Water could conceal secrets, but it never forgot treachery. Even nature itself turned conspirator. A sudden storm in 15th century, Ghent sent floodwaters surging through a critical meeting tunnel just as 2 rival dukes sealed their pact. The document's ink bled into illegibility as the rising tide forced the men to cling to sealing hooks for hours. By dawn, their alliance had dissolved along with the parchment, and the aqueduct's reputation as a trustworthy intermediary. These failures reveal the paradox of medieval subterfuge. The same tunnels that empowered the elite also made them vulnerable. A servant overhearing echoes in a conduit, a mason recognizing false walls, a sudden shift in water pressure betraying hidden doors. Every advantage carried its own peril. The aqueducts giveth, and the aqueducts taketh away. Rome's aqueducts marched across the landscape like triumphant armies, great stone arches proclaiming imperial might to friend and foe alike. But medieval engineers worked in whispers, burying their waterways beneath streets where only the initiated could follow their flow. This wasn't just a difference in engineering, it was a revolution in how power expressed itself. where Roman emperors used aqueducts as propaganda monuments to their ability to bend nature to their will. Medieval lords treated water channels like state secrets, their very invisibility a weapon. The contrast reveals a deeper truth about shifting political landscapes. Rome's centralized authority could afford to build brazenly, its aqueducts tracing straight lines from mountain springs to bustling cities. But in the fractured world of medieval Europe, where power was parceled out among rival nobles, merchant guilds, and church factions, survival depended on discretion. A single exposed aqueduct might reveal which lord controlled a city's water supply, or worse, provide an enemy with a hidden highway into its heart. That's why medieval builders favored labyrinthine designs over Roman efficiency, with deliberate dead ends and concealed Chinese letter that turned maintenance workers into gatekeepers of geopolitical secrets. Yet both systems shared a core purpose: water as a tool of control. The Romans famously used aqueducts to reward loyal provinces and punish rebellious ones, cut off a city's flow, and watch order dissolve within days. Medieval rulers refined this tactic with chilling precision. In 12th century Cordoba, the caliph's engineers built a parallel network of shadow aqueducts that bypassed entire neighborhoods, allowing them to starve dissenters of water without disrupting allies. The Roman approach was a hammer, the medieval method a scalpel. The most telling difference lies in what each civilization chose to commemorate. Roman aqueducts bore inscriptions celebrating the emperors who funded them, their stones carved with boasts of engineering prowess. Medieval aqueduct builders left no signatures, only the occasional coded mark hidden in brickwork, like the seven-pointed star found in Nuremberg's tunnels that historians now believe identified passages reserved for the Teutonic Knights. Glory gave way to ghosts. What united both eras was the unshakable link between water and power. Whether channeled through soaring arches or buried beneath butcher shops, aqueducts were never just about hydration. They were the physical manifestation of a ruler's most fundamental promise: to sustain life or withhold it. The Romans shouted this truth from their triumphal arches. The medieval world whispered it through damp stone corridors, and in both cases, those who controlled the flow wrote history in liquid. The age of aqueduct intrigue didn't end with a dramatic collapse or some grand betrayal. It faded quietly, paved over by progress itself. As medieval cities burst their walls and sprawled outward, the labyrinth of hidden channels became inconvenient relics. Cobblestones swallowed access grates, new sewers rerouted ancient waterways, and most damning of all, centralized governments began to view secrecy as more threatening than useful. Why whisper in tunnels when you could proclaim edicts from a royal printing press? Yet the death knell came from an unexpected quarter: public health. The same damp corridors that once carried political whispers now bred disease, their stagnant pools becoming breeding grounds for plague. In London, the Great Stink of 1858 forced authorities to demolish sections of the old Ludgate Aqueduct, its once strategic passages now choked with filth. Similar scenes played out across Europe as engineers armed with germ theory and iron pipe replaced mystery with modernity, the very feature that made aqueducts perfect for covert meetings. Their isolation from prying eyes now rendered them threats to the body politic itself. But the networks didn't vanish entirely. Beneath Vienna's Graben Square, tourists today stroll over glass panels revealing 12th century channels where Habsburg agents once slipped between palaces. In Seville, workers repairing a subway line in 1992 stumbled upon a perfectly preserved Moorish aqueduct chamber, its walls still bearing the soot marks of medieval tortures. Most haunting of all are the ghost maps, overlays of modern cities showing where forgotten tunnels still lurk beneath shopping malls and parking garages, their original purposes erased by time. Perhaps the final irony is how these relics occasionally resurface in the digital age. When heavy rains flood Parisian basements, long-sealed grates sometimes disgorge centuries-old wax-sealed tubes onto startled homeowners. Construction crews in Barcelona still consult yellowed monastic ledgers before digging, lest they rupture a conduit that once carried Visigoth bribes. The water remembers what history books forget. That power never truly disappears, it just finds new channels. And if you press your ear to the right manhole cover on a quiet night, you might still hear the echoes of footsteps that shaped kingdoms, whispering up through the stones like a secret that refuses to stay buried. The dripping stone corridors of medieval aqueducts may lie buried under modern cities, but their legacy pulses through today's hidden networks, where power still flows through channels the public never sees. Consider the labyrinth of utility tunnels beneath Washington, D.C., where fiber optic cables carry encrypted whispers between embassies just as clay pipes once ferried coded messages. Or the storm drains beneath Las Vegas, where urban explorers routinely find stashes of cash and burner phones, evidence that subterranean shortcuts remain the preferred routes for those operating in shadows. Even cryptocurrencies, with their decentralized ledgers and dark web marketplaces, function like digital aqueducts, invisible pipelines moving value beyond the reach of kings and tax collectors alike. Archaeologists wielding ground-penetrating radar have made startling connections between ancient and modern systems. In London, a team mapping the lost rivers beneath Fleet Street discovered a Tudor-era tunnel that perfectly aligns with a modern Whitehall communications conduit, proof that governments have been layering secret pathways for centuries. Similarly, excavations in Istanbul revealed how Ottoman engineers repurposed Byzantine aqueduct channels to spy on foreign merchants, their listening posts eerily similar to NSA wiretap rooms found in underpasses today. The tools have changed, but the playbook remains. Control the unseen, and you control the game. Some discoveries blur the line between past and present. Workers expanding a Berlin subway in 2019 broke through a wall into a Cold War-era tunnel lined with vintage listening devices, only to realize it branched off a much older passage used by Prussian spies. The walls bore scratches in two distinct patterns: 18th-century Masonic symbols and 1950s binary code. Even the materials whispered of continuity. Medieval lead pipes had been melted down to mold 20th-century radiation shielding, turning ancient secrets into modern ones. The most revealing finds aren't always physical. Decrypted Florentine banking records show how Medici agents used aqueduct access as collateral for loans, a practice mirrored today when tech giants trade server farm bandwidth for political favors. And just as medieval guilds guarded aqueduct maps with lethal secrecy, modern corporations litigate fiercely to keep infrastructure blueprints from public view. When a burst pipe flooded a Google data center in 2022, investigators found its drainage plans suspiciously lost, much like the missing tunnel diagrams that plagued medieval city councils during plumbing disasters. Perhaps the starkest parallel lies in how both eras weaponized maintenance. Medieval lords would stage fake aqueduct repairs to mask troop movements. Contemporary politicians similarly declare infrastructure weeks while quietly pushing legislation through legislative backchannels. The difference: today's hidden networks span continents, undersea cables, satellite networks, blockchain nodes, yet they serve the same ancient purpose: ensuring that real power flows where no one thinks to look. What archaeology ultimately reveals is humanity's unbroken obsession with controlling the invisible. Whether chiseling secret channels beneath a marketplace or routing data through encrypted tunnels, elites still understand the best way to rule is to make the infrastructure of power disappear before the public even notices it exists. The stones may have been replaced by silicon, but the water, whether liquid or digital, still finds its way to those who know how to divert the current. Archaeologists chiseling through limestone in Valencia last year made a startling discovery: a bricked-up side chamber in a 14th century aqueduct, its walls covered in candle soot and cryptic carvings. Inside lay a trove of artifacts that read like a medieval spy's toolkit: lead capsules with rolled parchment still intact, a rusted dagger wedged between stones as if left in haste, and most tellingly, a collection of broken wax seals bearing the insignias of warring noble houses. These weren't random discards, they were frozen moments of clandestine diplomacy, preserved in the damp dark like a time capsule of subterranean statecraft. Similar finds across Europe are rewriting history books. Beneath Prague's old town, workers repairing a sewer line uncovered a recessed alcove with a stone table too small for utility, too precise for accident. Scratches on its surface matched contemporary accounts of water table negotiations, where rivals would draft treaties using inked quills and the table's natural moisture to blur compromising lines mid-conversation. In Bruges, dendrochronology dating of wooden message tubes pulled from silt revealed they'd been submerged during a documented truce between guilds, suggesting the aqueduct served as neutral territory when streets above ran red with violence. The most chilling evidence comes from sealed chambers. A bricked-off tunnel beneath Toulouse's market square yielded 23 skeletons, all male, all with hands bound behind their backs using a distinctive knot described in Inquisition records as the traitor's twist. Forensic analysis showed their bones bore no battle wounds, just the telltale pitting of prolonged damp exposure. These weren't soldiers fallen in combat. They were messengers and intermediaries, executed and hidden where only the water would bear witness. But the true revelation lies in the mundane. A corroded merchant scale found in a Milanese aqueduct branch wasn't for weighing coins. Its counterbalance had been adjusted to detect minute differences in wax seal density, a primitive but effective way to spot forged documents. Nearby, archaeologists found walnut shells hollowed into makeshift cups, their interiors stained with wine residue mixed with powdered hematite. Contemporary poison manuals describe this very concoction as the negotiator's friend, a slow-acting toxin that could be slipped to untrustworthy envoys, its effects delayed until they'd left the tunnels. Perhaps most poignant are the personal relics. In a collapsed section of Seville's ancient waterways, excavators found a child's leather shoe beside a scribbled game of tic-tac-toe on a plaster wall, likely the idle doodling of a noble son waiting while adults bartered overhead. Nearby, a silver hairpin engraved with a lover's initials hints at stolen meetings between politically inconvenient sweethearts. These intimate fragments remind us that history's grand schemes were lived by real people, their private lives intersecting with subterfuge in ways both tragic and tender. Each discovery peels back another layer of the aqueduct's dual nature. The same channels that carried drinking water also ferried threats. The stones that supported bustling markets concealed altars where sworn enemies clasped hands over shared interests. Modern imaging technology now lets us trace these hidden pathways without lifting a trowel, revealing how one tunnel in Ghent makes an inexplicable detour, not for engineering reasons, but to pass directly beneath the bedchamber of a long-dead countess. The water may have stopped flowing centuries ago, but the secrets it carried still ripple through time, waiting for the right hands to piece them together. Decoding these medieval maps requires thinking like a conspirator, seeing not just lines on parchment, but a three-dimensional chessboard of stone and shadow. Take the famous fountain map of Florence, now housed in the Palazzo Vecchio archives. At first glance, it appears to chart public wells and fountains, but tilted toward candlelight, and faint silver point lines emergeth, threading beneath piazzas and between church walls like veins under skin. The symbols are disarmingly simple. A circled cross marks where tunnels intersect, while tiny fishhooks indicate passages with deadly drop-offs. Most ingenious are the singing stones, notes scribbled beside certain landmarks where acoustics carried voices farther underground, turning a baker's oven or blacksmith's anvil into natural amplifiers for eavesdropping. Not all clues were visual. In Bruges, a ledger from the Cloth Merchants Guild contains what seems like mundane accounting, until you notice certain entries spaced to form a rhythm when read aloud. Sung to the tune of a popular drinking song, the syllables correspond to distances between aqueduct access points beneath the marketplace. Other maps employed sensory deception, like the Sienna scroll that smells faintly of rosemary, a clue that rubbing the parchment with the herb would reveal hidden ink tracing the Bettini aqueduct's most secret branches. The real breakthrough came when scholars realized these maps weren't standalone documents, but keys meant to be used with physical markers. A map from Augsburg instructs viewers to follow the raven's shadow at matins, referencing a cathedral gargoyle whose morning shadow pointed to a disguised tunnel entrance. Similarly, the wine merchant's map of Lyon used actual wine stains as coordinates when draped over a barrel of certain vintage, the stains aligned with underground routes running beneath tavern cellars. Danger zones were coded with chilling creativity. Some maps depicted mythical creatures at specific locations. A doodled basilisk near a tunnel intersection warned of poisonous gases pooling there. Others borrowed from religious iconography. A tiny inverted cross marked passages rumored to collapse during full moons due to tidal pressure on groundwater. The most ominous warnings were mathematical. A string of prime numbers along a channel in Toledo's aqueducts later proved to measure intervals between flash flood zones. What emerges is a shadow cartography where every mark held life or death meaning. A smudged corner might indicate a spy's observation post, while an extra flourish on a capital letter could denote which noble family controlled that section. These weren't maps for navigation, they were survival guides for navigating a world where stepping into the wrong tunnel could mean disappearing into the dark forever. The parchment itself often hid layers. Ultraviolet imaging recently revealed a Parisian map palimpsest where newer routes had been scraped over older ones, creating a chronological record of shifting alliances written in erased ink and buried truths. Modern technology is finally cracking codes medieval mapmakers thought would never be broken. Multispectral imaging uncovered a Genos sea chart with aqueduct symbols disguised as sea monsters, their tentacles tracing emergency escape routes. Even mistakes prove revealing. A spilled ink blot on a Vienna map long dismissed as damage now appears intentional, matching the shape of a secret chamber where Habsburg agents intercepted messages by lowering cups into a water-filled shaft to capture vibrations from conversations above. The ultimate revelation, these maps were never meant to be comprehensive. Each was a piece of a larger puzzle, distributed among trusted allies like fragments of a treasure map. Only when combined with oral traditions, the whispered rhymes, the half-remembered legends of the wet path, did their full power emerge. They weren't guides to the underground so much as tests. Those who couldn't decipher them had no business walking those corridors in the first place. And for those who could, the maps whispered promises of power if they dared follow where the ink led. The morality of these hidden negotiations presents a paradox as tangled as the aqueduct tunnels themselves. On one hand, these secret channels prevented countless wars. Medieval chronicles describe how last-minute deals brokered beneath marketplaces halted impending battles, sparing thousands of lives that might have been lost in open conflict. The 1325 Treaty of Lyon, allegedly negotiated through a wine merchant's cellar connected to the city's aqueducts, ended a decade-long feud between French and Burgundian nobles without a single sword being drawn. Diplomats of the era argued that some truths were too volatile for daylight, like stabilizing a crumbling alliance by discreetly promising a rival's son a bishopric, or averting a trade war with carefully timed grain shipments through hidden canals. Yet the cost of such secrecy weighed heavily on civic trust. When Siena's aqueducts mysteriously ran dry during the 1346 bread riots, while noble districts still enjoyed flowing fountains, the resulting uprising left scorch marks still visible on the Palazzo Pubblico. Chroniclers wrote of commoners whispering that even the rats know more than honest men, as generations grew convinced their rulers governed through lies etched in water rather than laws carved in stone. The same tunnels that carried peace treaties also ferried bribes, like the infamous pearl drops scandal in Venice, where officials accepted jewelry smuggled in waterproof pouches to overlook smuggling operations. Modern parallels are uncomfortably vivid. Just as medieval burghers never knew if their taxes funded public fountains or backroom payoffs, today's citizens grapple with redacted documents and closed-door lobbying. The Nuremberg Codex of 1392 contains eerily contemporary debates. One marginal note asks whether silence that keeps peace is holier than truth that breeds swords, while a bishop's rebuttal scrawled beneath insists a kingdom built in shadows will drown when light comes. Perhaps the most damning evidence lies in the architecture itself. Later medieval aqueducts increasingly featured accountability channels, small observation ports where trusted monks could witness negotiations without participating. These precursors to modern transparency measures suggest even the architects of secrecy recognized its corrosive potential. Like water seeping through cracked mortar, the moral compromises of hidden governance eventually weakened the very foundations it sought to preserve, leaving us to ponder whether the peace brokered in darkness was ever truly sustainable, or merely a delayed reckoning written in groundwater and whispers. Dante's Inferno didn't just populate hell with fire, it drowned sinners in rivers of boiling blood and frozen sludge, their torments flowing through subterranean channels like a nightmarish parody of earthly aqueducts. This wasn't just poetic flourish, it tapped into a deep medieval dread that the waters beneath their feet might carry not just secrets but corruption. Literature of the era teemed with such imagery, hidden waterways as metaphors for the moral rot festering beneath society's polished surface. When Chaucer's Canterbury pilgrims spoke of underground streams that none may drink from, they weren't describing geography, but the whispered scandals that could poison a reputation. Fantasy worlds built on these fears, George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones borrowed directly from medieval subterfuge, with the secret tunnels of King's Landing mirroring the aqueduct networks of Bruges or Toledo. In one pivotal scene, Tyrion Lannister navigates a labyrinth of drains to outmaneuver his enemies, a sequence ripped from the annals of 14th century Florence, where rebels used aqueducts to infiltrate the Palazzo Vecchio. Even Tolkien's Moria, with its ominous wells and drowned corridors, echoes the very real terror medieval laborers felt when tunneling into the unknown, where a misstep might unleash a flood or a rival's blade. But the most revealing depictions aren't in epic fantasies, they're in the marginalia of illuminated manuscripts. A 12th century psalter from Canterbury shows a devil whispering into a well, his words traveling through underground channels to corrupt a sleeping town. Another depicts a king kneeling not at an altar, but beside a grate in the floor, his crown dangling precariously over the abyss. These weren't mere decorations, they were warnings about power's fragility when the ground itself could become a conduit for betrayal. Modern authors continue the tradition. Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell features a labyrinth of magical rivers beneath London, where lost souls wander as they once did in medieval aqueducts, both prisons and escape routes. The difference: today's hidden waterways are digital, but the fear remains the same, that beneath the world we see, another current flows, carrying truths too dangerous to surface. The same medieval engineers who designed aqueducts to whisper secrets also pioneered techniques that shaped modern cities in ways we still walk through every day. Those twisting tunnels weren't just escape routes for spies. They were laboratories for innovations we now take for granted. Take London's Victorian sewers, where Joseph Bazalgette borrowed the medieval trick of using gravity-fed gradients to keep water moving, just as 14th century masons had done beneath Bruges. Even the brickwork tells a story. Herringbone patterns perfected in Burgundian aqueducts to withstand soil pressure reappear in New York's subway tunnels, their durability proven by 600 years of silent service. But the real legacy lies in the marriage of function and secrecy. Modern utility tunnels still follow the medieval playbook, disguising critical infrastructure in plain sight. Chicago's pedway system, a network of underground walkways connecting skyscrapers, mirrors the logic of Milan's market tunnels, where nobles once moved unseen. Today's fiber optic cables often trace the same paths as ancient aqueducts, not by accident, but because urban planners rediscovered what medieval engineers knew: the safest route is the one everyone forgot existed. Some techniques never went out of style. The singing pipes of medieval Cordoba, where water flow created vibrations to mask conversations, inspired the acoustic baffles in modern diplomatic bunkers. Paris's stormwater reservoirs still use Moorish-designed sedimentation chambers first seen in Toledo's hidden cisterns. Even the Vatican's archives employ a medieval humidity control system, its airflows calibrated by studying how parchment survived for centuries in aqueduct-adjacent vaults. What's most striking is how contemporary security experts have revived medieval approaches. The Pentagon's blast-resistant corridors echo the defensive curves of Siena's Bettini tunnels, while biometric scanners now guard passages once secured by trick locks and drowning chambers. When engineers needed to earthquake-proof Los Angeles's water mains, they studied how Bolognese aqueducts flexed during tremors thanks to their intentional, weak joints, a feature originally designed to collapse and trap pursuers. The ultimate testament to these innovations: they work best when invisible. Just as medieval cities flourished while their underground networks stayed hidden, today's metropolises rely on systems we rarely notice until they fail. The next time you ride a subway or turn on a tap, remember, you're benefiting from centuries of accumulated genius, much of it forged in the damp darkness where politics and plumbing once flowed together. The past isn't buried beneath our streets, it's keeping them standing. Picture yourself kneeling in a dim tunnel beneath a bustling marketplace, the cold stone damp against your palms as distant footsteps echo through the winding passages. You clutch a sealed letter that could end a war or start one, depending on which noble's hands it reaches. This was the daily dilemma of medieval power brokers who navigated these submerged corridors. The choices they faced weren't so different from the ones we grapple with today. Exploit hidden knowledge for personal gain, wield it to stabilize a fractured society, or disappear into the shadows as a silent witness. Consider the leverage these tunnels offered. A merchant with access could overhear guild leaders plotting price hikes and sell that intelligence to competitors, or use it to negotiate protection from the crown. A minor noble might divert a water channel to ruin a rival's crops, framing it as divine punishment during a drought. Even simpler acts held power. Delaying a message by hours could determine whether a truce was signed or an army marched. Every twist in the aqueduct was a fork in the road of history, and those who knew the turns held the compass. Modern parallels emerge when you swap stone tunnels for digital ones. Today's encrypted chats and closed-door boardrooms serve the same purpose as those dripping passageways. Would you expose corruption like a medieval scribe leaking documents through monastery drainage channels, or play both sides like a Venetian spice merchant whose cargo holds hid encrypted letters? The tactics have evolved, whispered conversations replaced by data dumps, wax seals by digital signatures, but the core dilemma remains: control information, and you control the narrative. Think about the ethical weight of such choices. A 14th century broker might justify selling secrets to fund an orphanage, just as a modern whistleblower weighs personal risk against public good. The aqueducts didn't create moral ambiguity. They revealed it, forcing people to confront how far they'd go when no one was watching. That's why these tunnels still fascinate us. They're mirrors reflecting timeless questions about power's seductive allure and the price of complicity. Now imagine your boots scraping against wet stone as you approach a crossroads. One path leads to a rebel camp where your information could prevent a massacre. The other winds upward to a lord's chamber where the same knowledge might earn you a chest of silver. The darkness doesn't judge, it simply waits. That's the real lesson of history's hidden networks. The walls don't decide who you become. The choices you make in the dark reveal who you already are. Hollywood would have us believe medieval aqueducts were grand subterranean halls, torch-lit galleries where cloaked figures strode dramatically through echoing chambers. The truth, most were barely wide enough to crawl through damp, claustrophobic tunnels where even a rat might feel cramped. That narrow passage beneath Siena's Piazza del Campo, where two rival bankers allegedly brokered a truce. Contemporary measurements show it was only 35 centimeters across at its narrowest point, barely shoulder width for an average adult. These weren't cinematic dungeons. They were utilitarian arteries, their genius lying in what could be achieved within such punishing constraints. Consider the physical toll of navigating these spaces. Surviving tunics from aqueduct couriers show telltale wear patterns, knees and elbows permanently stained with mineral deposits from crawling, shoulders rubbed raw by constant contact with uneven stone. One skeleton excavated from a collapsed tunnel in Regensburg revealed a spine curved sideways from years of moving through passages built for water flow, not human comfort. Yet it was precisely these limitations that made them effective. A nobleman forced to crouch or crawl was less likely to bring an armed retinue, reducing negotiations to bare essentials: just two rivals and the weight of their words in the dripping dark. The myth of spaciousness also obscures their true innovation. Medieval engineers mastered the art of concealment through minimalism. In Lyon, a critical message relay point consisted of nothing more than a recessed alcove the size of a bread oven, its door a pivoting stone barely thicker than a coin. Venice's infamous whisper conduit near the Rialto was just a funnel-shaped groove carved into an existing water channel, yet its acoustics carried voices 50 meters to a listening post disguised as a wine cellar. These weren't the sprawling sets of fantasy films. They were feats of micro-engineering where every centimeter mattered. Even the lighting defies modern expectations. Torches were rare, too smoky for enclosed spaces, too visible through ventilation grates. Instead, couriers relied on bioluminescent fungi cultivated in moss-lined niches or slow-burning wax pellets that cast just enough light to navigate without betraying movement. A recently discovered travel diary, scratched onto a lead sheet in Nuremberg's tunnels, describes journeys timed to moonlit nights, when slivers of light through strategically placed grates created a navigable path. The romance of flickering torchlight gives way to a more fascinating reality, a world of calculated shadows and measured steps. What popular culture misses is the psychological brilliance of these tight spaces. The very discomfort that seems like a flaw was a feature. Chroniclers note how negotiators in confined tunnels reached agreements faster, perhaps because cold knees and aching backs focused minds wonderfully. A Milanese architect's manual from 1412 even recommends low ceilings in treaty chambers to discourage lengthy discourse. The aqueducts didn't need grandeur to wield power. They turned physical constraint into political advantage, proving that sometimes history's most important conversations happened not in halls of state, but in spaces barely fit for standing. The whispers of hidden waterways weren't confined to Europe's cobblestone alleys. They echoed across continents, proving that where water flowed, power followed. In Istanbul, the Byzantine Empire's vast underground cisterns doubled as clandestine meeting chambers, their vaulted ceilings amplifying hushed conversations between emperors and spies. The same pillars that supported the city above also bore cryptic carvings, notches marking secret passages, or symbols visible only when torchlight hit the water at certain angles. Half a world away, Tenochtitlan's Aztec engineers built causeways with hollow channels beneath them, allowing messengers to move unseen between temples and palaces while crowds thronged overhead. Though oceans apart, these cultures arrived at the same startling realization: control the unseen currents, and you control the narrative of history itself. What's fascinating isn't just the similarity of these systems, but the shared tactics that emerged independently. Venetian diplomats and Mayan merchants alike used water's sound to mask conversations, the former whispering beside cascading aqueduct outlets, the latter timing talks to the splash of ritual baths. In Cairo, Fatimid caliphs employed water scribes who wrote messages on thin parchment that dissolved when submerged, while in Kyoto, shoguns sealed treaties with ink that only became visible when dampened by tunnel humidity. The same tricks, the same instincts, as if humanity had a collective playbook for turning infrastructure into intrigue. The parallels extend to how these networks collapsed. Just as London's medieval aqueducts were repurposed for sewers, the Abbasids of Baghdad deliberately flooded their own subterranean canals during Mongol invasions, drowning invaders while preserving escape routes for the elite. In Cusco, Inca engineers destroyed key segments of their sacred water channels to stall Spanish conquistadors, sacrificing public water access to buy time for resistance. Time and again, when empires fell, their hidden waterways became both last refuges and final weapons, proof that even in collapse, the link between liquid and power held fast. Perhaps the most striking universal feature was the use of water as a silent enforcer. In Constantinople, emperors staged elaborate fountain ceremonies where dyed water miraculously changed color to signal divine favor or displeasure with certain nobles. Meanwhile, in the Khmer Empire's Anchor, rulers calibrated reservoir levels to alternately reward loyal farmers with irrigation or drown rebellious villages under deliberate floods. Different continents, identical stratagems, demonstrating authority not through brute force, but by manipulating the one resource no one could live without. These global echoes reveal an uncomfortable truth. Whether in Renaissance Florence or pre-colonial Benin, those who mastered hidden water networks didn't just gain an advantage, they rewrote reality itself. A Mughal emperor's secret tunnel beneath Delhi's Red Fort allowed him to vanish during uprisings, fueling myths of supernatural powers. The Mayas' pressurized springs at Palenque created the illusion of temples, weeping on command, turning engineering into theater. Water's dual nature, life-giving yet deadly, transparent yet concealing, made it the perfect medium for power's oldest magic trick, convincing people that what they couldn't see didn't exist. Today, walking through Istanbul's Basilica Cistern or Mexico City's Templo Mayor excavations, you're treading on the submerged chessboards of history. The stones may wear different carvings, the water may speak different names, but the lesson remains: humanity's thirst for control always finds its channels. And somewhere, in whatever hidden veins carry power now, the game continues just as fluid, just as relentless as it ever was. The hidden aqueducts beneath medieval markets weren't just stone and water. They were the living pulse of power, thrumming with secrets while the world above bartered for bread and cloth. Think of them as the medieval dark web, a submerged network where information moved faster than any courier, where a diverted channel could topple a dynasty as surely as an army. But here's what's truly chilling: we're still walking over versions of these systems today. Those subway tunnels beneath Manhattan, the fiber optic cables under Silicon Valley. They're the modern heirs to those dripping passageways, carrying different currencies but serving the same ancient purpose: to keep the real game just out of view. Consider how little has changed in the playbook of influence. Medieval lords used aqueducts to control water access as leverage. Today's power brokers manipulate data flows and supply chains. A 14th century merchant might bribe a tunnel guard to smuggle silk past tariffs, while a 21st century executive pays for priority bandwidth to skew stock trades. The tools have evolved from wax-sealed scrolls to encrypted servers, but the strategy remains: control the invisible currents, and you control the kingdom. Yet there's a crucial difference. Where medieval commoners might glimpse a noble's damp robe hem and guess at subterranean dealings, our modern systems are so opaque we often forget they exist. At least the baker in Bruges knew the aqueducts were there, even if he couldn't access them. Can you say the same about the server farms or financial algorithms shaping your life? The real legacy of these hidden waterways isn't their engineering. It's the lesson they teach about how power thrives in the blind spots of public attention. So the next time you pass a manhole cover or hear water rushing through a storm drain, pause. That sound isn't just runoff, it's the echo of 1,000 years of whispered deals and diverted streams. History doesn't just repeat itself, it flows underground, finding new channels but following the same relentless course. And if you listen closely, the stones still have secrets to tell, if you're willing to kneel in the dark and press your ear to the damp walls. The water remembers. The question is, do we?